There was a moment in your life when you almost stopped believing in God. You didn't say it out loud, you didn't post it on any social media, but inside you, you felt something break. It wasn't because of a video or a book, it was because of a question no one knew how to answer. If everything has a beginning, where did God come from? If everything needs a creator, who created God? They told you not to ask that. That doubting was wrong, that asking that question could offend God. But the question never left. It stayed there, silent, waiting for you on those nights when you stared at the ceiling thinking, what if everything I was taught doesn't fit with this doubt? Today I'm not going to tell you to ignore that question. Today we're going to step into it. We're going to go beyond time, beyond the first second of the universe, beyond everything your eyes have seen, to face head-on the question you were afraid to ask. And before you decide to stop believing in God because of what no one ever explained to you, you need to hear this all the way to the end, because when you understand the truth about the origin of God, you might not only keep your faith, you might see it with a depth you never imagined. If you've ever felt shame or fear for even thinking about this question, stay. This video is exactly for you. And as you watch, if this doubt has ever followed you around, dare to write in the comments, yes, I wondered the same thing. You're not alone in this. Think about the first time you ever heard someone talk about God. Maybe it was when you were a child, at home, hearing someone say that God sees everything. Maybe it was in a place full of people, with music, big words, and promises of hope. Maybe you only remember one phrase, God is eternal. It sounds beautiful. But if you're honest, at some point your mind paused and quietly asked, eternal since when? What was God's first moment? That's where the battle began. On one hand, you were taught that God created everything. On the other hand, your logic told you, if everything that exists has a beginning, then God should have one too, right? And then a subtle fear appeared. Fear of asking the wrong question. Fear of looking like you had no faith. Fear that if you ask too much, everything will collapse. What no one explained to you is that your question wasn't disrespectful. It was the natural reaction of a mind that lives inside time, trying to understand someone who lives outside of time. It's like a fish trying to imagine what it feels like to walk on dry land, or like someone asking you what's further north than the North Pole. Your mind is designed to think in beginnings, endings, causes and effects. You are surrounded by things that begin and end. A day, a job, a relationship, a life. Everything you know has a starting date. That's why, when they tell you that God has no beginning, your mind quietly rebels. Not because it rejects God, but because it doesn't know where to put him. Your mind looks for a box, a category, an explanation that fits with everything else. The answer you were never given doesn't start with you just have to believe. It starts by recognizing this. You and I are trapped in time, but God is not. Imagine time as a gigantic river. For you, that river is everything that exists. You were born inside the river. You move with the current. You watch the water go by and never return. Ahead of you, the future. Behind you, the past. In the middle, the present. That tiny point where you really live. Now imagine God not inside the river, but outside of it. Not carried by the current, but seeing the whole course from above. Your birth, today, and the last day of history, all at the same time before him. You only see one drop at a time. God sees the entire ocean. In ancient writings, when someone asked God who he was, he didn't answer with a title or a resume. He didn't say, I'm the creator of this and that, or I began at this moment. He answered with something that breaks the human mind. I am. Not, I was. Not, I will be. I am. That phrase doesn't fit on a calendar. It doesn't fit on a timeline. Because it's not describing a beginning, it's describing a way of existing. God is not a being who showed up at some far-off moment in the past and has been alive ever since. God is existence itself, the source, the origin of what we call beginning. When you ask, who created God? You are using a logic that makes sense inside the river of time. But God is not somewhere in the middle of the river, waiting for his turn to be explained. God is the one who designed the river, who holds its course, who exists even if the river were to stop flowing. That's why the question feels so heavy. It's not that it's wrong, it's that you're using a tool that can't measure him, like trying to weigh love in kilos or measure the wind with a ruler. Maybe at this point something inside you resists. Okay, it sounds beautiful, but it still doesn't answer what I feel. Does God just exist, just because? Just like that? Isn't that an easy way out? Stay with me. Don't leave yet. If this makes you uncomfortable, it means you're exactly where you need to be. And if something you've heard so far is stirring something inside you, write it down below. Sometimes putting it into words is the first step to healing your relationship with your own doubts. There's another question we all secretly ask. If God existed before everything, ... what was he doing before he created the universe? Wasn't he alone? Didn't he get bored? We picture God sitting in an empty eternity, staring at nothing, counting endless seconds, but that only shows how trapped we are in our way of thinking. Think of someone who doesn't need anything to be whole. Someone who isn't filled by things, places, achievements, or applause. Someone who, even if everything disappeared, would still be complete. Now raise that to a level your mind can't measure. That barely begins to touch what it means for God to exist before everything. Before there was a universe, there were no clocks, there were no suns marking days, and no planets spinning in orbit. There were no seconds, there was no before and no after, but there was consciousness, life, will, love. There was God. He was not empty. He was not incomplete. He wasn't trying to figure out what to do with his eternity. He was simply being what he has always been, fullness. And yet, at a point that isn't a point on any calendar, he decided to create. He decided that angels, galaxies, light, matter, history, and you would exist. Here's where you may have never stopped to think. Before a single star existed, your story was already seen. Before there was light, God already knew what each of your darkest nights would be like. Before there was language, God already knew every word you would one day be afraid to say. For many ancient thinkers, before God created the universe, he had already thought of you, not as a number on an endless list, but as a real person, with a name, a face, wounds, decisions, and possibilities. Someone he wanted to give freedom to, even knowing the price. Imagine this. Before the first spark of the universe existed, God could see each one of your tears. Every time you would feel that faith is not enough. Every night when your prayer would seem to bounce off the ceiling. And even so, he decided that you would exist. But if God knew everything, there's another question that hurts even more. If God knew there would be pain, betrayal, evil, even rejection of him, why did he create free beings? Why didn't he just make everything perfect and leave it at that? To understand that, we have to talk about something that happened long before you were born, but that affects every part of your life. The first time someone decided to use their freedom to turn away from God. Imagine a creation so beautiful that all of heaven fell silent at the sight of it. Not a planet, not a star, but a spiritual person, a being of light, radiant, full of wisdom, covered in beauty. Someone placed very close to the heart of God. He wasn't born evil. He wasn't created with darkness. He was envisioned as a masterpiece. His presence filled the place where he was with harmony. You could imagine him leading worship, reflecting the glory he received. But one day, something changed. Not on the outside, but on the inside. In the middle of so much beauty, a shadow appeared. Pride. It wasn't a shout at first, it was a whisper. I deserve more. I could be higher. Why do I have to give glory if I could receive it? That whisper grew. It became an idea. The idea became a decision. And the decision broke something in spiritual reality. That being, whom many call Lucifer, stopped seeing God's greatness as enough and started seeing his own as a possible throne. He didn't just want to be close to God, he wanted to be treated like God. And here something appears that affects you directly. God could have stopped that thought before it was born. He could have designed beings with no possibility of rebelling. He could have made perfect creatures who would never choose evil. But then there would be no freedom. And without freedom, there is no true love. The price for you being able to truly love God is the possibility that you can also reject him. The price for a being to be able to worship was that they could also turn against the one who created them. When that pride was unleashed, the purest place became the stage of the first war. Not with physical weapons, but with wills. One group decided to remain faithful to God. Another group decided to follow the rebel. Harmony was broken. What had always been perfect now had a deep wound. What had been created to reflect light became a source of darkness. And maybe you're asking yourself, why didn't God destroy him on the spot? Why didn't he just end him right there? Because there is something God does not do. He does not betray his own design. If he gave freedom, he is not going to cancel it every time it hurts. If he created beings capable of choosing, he will respect that ability to the very end. That doesn't mean evil gets the final word. It means that God decided history would show something greater than a universe of obedient robots. It would show what love is facing rejection without becoming like what it's fighting. After that rupture, the story didn't stop. God didn't abandon his creation. On the contrary, he began something that you are living in now, even if you don't always see it. The process where this world becomes an arena of decisions, a space where freedom and love become visible. Earth is not just a place to survive, work and die. It is the stage where it's revealed what it means that there is a God without beginning, who could have chosen not to create you, but decided to do it anyway. This is where you choose what to do with that love. And here something comes in that completely changes the question from the beginning. Because the God who has no origin didn't stay watching from a distance. He didn't limit himself to sending messages, books or signs in the sky. At one moment in history, he took a step no one saw coming. He decided to enter his own creation. Imagine the author of a story, writing characters, plots and timelines. All the characters live inside the book. They have a beginning, a development and an ending. They can't see the author. They can only read his words. Now imagine that one day, that author decides to write a version of himself into the book. A version that feels, suffers, gets tired, cries, bleeds. A version that can be rejected by the very characters he created. That is what many have understood when they talk about God becoming man in Jesus. The one who had no beginning entered a body with a birth date. The one who could not die accepted the experience of death. The one who held the universe together allowed himself to be nailed to a piece of wood made from the trees he himself caused to grow. Why? Because the deepest question wasn't just where did God come from, but why would a God who needs nothing choose to suffer for me? I want you to think about your moments of greatest pain, not in theories, but in real scenes from your life. That day when you felt that nobody understood you. That prayer that seemed to bounce off into the void. That time you thought, if God really existed, he wouldn't allow this. Now imagine that in each one of those scenes, God is not far away, watching from a cold throne. Imagine that the same God who has no origin chose to know by experience what rejection, loneliness, contempt and unjust suffering feel like. When you ask, who created God? Your mind is searching for a cause, a beginning. But when you look at what God chose to do for you, there is another, stronger question. What kind of love is this? A being who needs nothing, who could exist eternally without you, decides to create you, give you freedom, run the risk that you might reject him, and then step into history to carry the weight of everything that breaks you on the inside. That is the same God you ask about when you say, where did he come from? And the deepest answer is not just he didn't come from anywhere. The deeper answer is, he is the origin, but he chose to come so close to you that he was willing to look weak in your eyes, just so he wouldn't lose you. Maybe at this point your original doubt begins to look different. It's no longer just a matter of logic. It's a window into something bigger. It's not just about whether God has a beginning or not. It's about what you're going to do with the fact that this God without beginning wants you. You may still feel questions without answers. That's okay. God doesn't break because you ask. He doesn't stop being God because your mind can't contain him. He's not an idea that only holds together if you never doubt. He is, even when you tremble. What matters is that you understand this. When you thought about stopping believing in God because no one explained his origin to you, you weren't standing at the end of your faith. You were standing in front of a door. The door where you stop seeing God as a character in stories and start seeing him as someone who transcends time but chooses to step into yours. If anything you've heard today has lit a spark, no matter how small, don't ignore it. Maybe you don't feel a huge faith. Maybe you just feel a desire to understand a little more, to not let go so quickly, to give a chance to this God who, before anything else, already saw you. I want to give you a very simple but very sincere invitation. Before you decide that God doesn't exist, or that believing in him isn't worth it, talk to him from that doubt. Not with memorized phrases, not with elegant words, but with your broken sentences, with your I don't understand, your this hurts, your it's hard for me to believe. And if this video helped you even a little to see the question, where did God come from another angle, tell me. Write in the comments which part spoke to you the most, what image stayed with you, or which question you still find hard to let go of. I want to read your story, because even if I don't know you in person, what you live through matters. You're not the only one who has felt this struggle. There are thousands of people on the edge of giving up their faith because of the same doubts you have. If you know someone like that, don't keep this just for yourself. Share this video with that person. Maybe what today was an explanation for you, for that person could be the reason not to give up yet. And if you want to keep walking through this kind of topic without being afraid of difficult questions, subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell. Here we are building a community of people who don't want a blind faith, but a real relationship with God. People who dare to ask, to think, to feel, and to discover that God is not scared of their doubts. Every time you leave a like, leave a comment, and share this content, you help more people who are about to let everything go come across a message that can stop them at the edge. You are part of this too. Because in the end, the question is not just who created God, but what will you do with a God who, without ever being created by anyone, decided to love you as if you were his most precious treasure. And if you're still here, breathing, doubting, searching, it's because that story between you and him is not over yet.